Hi, I'm Michelle from Have Fork Will Travel, and I'm here today for the Healthy Thanksgiving program from the Fresno County Public Library. Today we're going to cover one of the Thanksgiving side dishes, cranberry sauce. Some people prefer the canned variety, and I don't have anything against that, but it only takes a few minutes, and you can make fresh cranberry sauce that your family will enjoy. So to start with, we're going to take 12 ounces of fresh or frozen cranberries, basically one bag, 1 cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons of orange or lemon zest, and 1/4 cup of orange juice, and about 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So to get started, we're going to add the orange juice into the pan. There's some pulp in there, it's fresh squeezed, and the cranberries. Okay, there's a green one, that can go away. And while that's heating up, you just want to keep an eye on it a little bit, and we're going to add half of the sugar. It just takes a few minutes to heat up. Once it starts cooking, the cranberries are going to release liquid, so you don't need a whole lot in the pan. And once they start softening up, they're going to break down and condense a little bit and turn kind of jammy. So now we just have to wait. Make sure you stir the pan occasionally. You don't want to have the sugar start burning, but it should heat up fairly rapidly. You don't want to cook it over too high of a heat, again, so you don't want the sugar to scorch. If you've ever walked away from a pan of melting sugar on the stove, it can turn to a burn mess fairly quickly. All right, there we go. They're starting to pop a little bit. You can hear a little bit of sizzling, which is just what it's supposed to do. And now we wait. You don't have to stir it constantly, but do keep an eye on the temperature and the heat and reduce it as needed. With those sizzles and pops, that's just the cranberries heating up and releasing some of the liquid. So you want it over a low to medium low heat. And you can really smell the orange juice. If it starts to heat up a little bit too fast or seems like it's going to scorch, lower the heat just a little bit more, or add maybe 1/4 cup, if that, of water. It's going to evaporate a little bit, and the natural pectin in the cranberries will turn it into kind of a gel, which is where the canned version comes from. But with this version, it's going to have a little bit of body to it. What you can do, if you prefer just more of the jelly texture with less of the cranberry fruit itself, is you can squeeze the cranberries, juice them, and use that instead. It will take a little bit more watching to make sure it doesn't burn because of just pure sugar and water at that point. And as you can see, it has a little bit of liquid. And that's coming from the berries themselves. That is not from the orange juice. Some of the water will evaporate, and that's perfectly fine. And this is what it looks like when they start breaking down. It happens very quickly. This is only about a 10 to 15 minute total dish. And I highly recommend doing it at least a day or two before. That way it has a chance to cool off and set. And then just take it out right before you want to serve it. If you happen to have any leftovers at the end of the holiday, and I don't know why you would, you can always put it in the middle of, like, make muffins and make filled muffins with that. Treat it like any sort of jelly. It works really well, turned into a glaze over meat, chicken, just a nice sweet tart flavor. So don't think that you can only have cranberry sauce on Thanksgiving. It's pretty versatile, and you can use it in so many ways, just like you would a regular, any sort of jelly or jam, to make a vinaigrette or a marinade or basting sauce for your dishes. And see, they're breaking down really rapidly. At this point, it's almost up to you as far as how far down you want the berries to go. You can cook them until they're super jammy and very little crunch to them left, or you can leave them partially cooked, or uncooked I should say, and have a little bit of more bite to them. I like mine a little bit softer, so we're going to cook them down just a little bit further. And we're going to add the rest of the sugar and the orange zest. Get in there. And it will spatter, so watch the heat and turn it down if it starts doing that. And now that I've added the orange zest in there, you can really smell the holidays in the air. We're going to let it cook just a little bit more. Again, watching it really quickly, or watching it quite a bit because of the amount of sugar. You don't want it to burn. So at this point, we're going to stir continuously. See, doesn't that look pretty? Just like the holidays. Now, there's some variations. If you want, you could fold in some chopped mint at the end, or add a little bit of vanilla, about a teaspoon, if you want a little bit more candied flavor to it. But it's pretty easy to change it as you want. Again, you can use lemon or orange zest. It's up to you. I happen to like orange and cranberries quite a bit. And we're about there. So at this point, the texture is fairly runny. There are some larger pieces of cranberry in there, and that's fine. If you want to cook it a little bit longer, I would recommend, like I said, adding about a quarter cup of water, keeping it on a lower heat, and letting it go for just a little bit longer. It will set up as it cools. So at this point, we're going to put it in the container. Smooth it out so that way it can cool evenly, and just let it sit on the counter in a safe place until it's completely cool, and then put it in the refrigerator until you're ready to use it. Once it's cool, I would recommend covering it with plastic wrap before you put it in the fridge. If you cover it while it's warm, it's going to sweat and get kind of runny. You want more of a gel texture to it. That's all there is. Welcome to Cranberry Sauce 101. And remember, life is too short for bad food. Hi, this is Michelle from Have Fork Will Travel, and I'm here for the Fresno County Library's Healthy Thanksgiving Dinner. So today's session is going to be two types of stuffing. Stuffing is one of those dishes that people have a tendency of not liking because it's too mushy or everything tastes the same. We're going to change that today. One of the stuffings is a traditional with bread and croutons to give it a little bit of texture, and the other one is a quinoa stuffing that can be made vegetarian or vegan by simply using vegetable stock. So we're going to start with that one first. We have a variety of things. This is a good way to add in extra veggies and liven up your life a little bit. So we're going to start with 1 cup of quinoa, a cup and a half of stock, about a quarter cup of chopped mushrooms, a quarter cup of olive oil, about a teaspoon of poultry seasoning or sage. Try and say that 3 times fast. About a quarter cup of chopped onion, and just use your favorite one for that one. We have 1 small butternut squash that's been peeled, seeded, and chopped. 1 zucchini. Again, this is one of those dishes that you can make extra of, and it's really good the next day. We have some additional add-ins that you can put in as you choose. We have green onions to top it with. We have some Italian peppers. They're more on the sweet side. They're not spicy at all, similar to a sweeter bell pepper. You can't have stuffing without celery. And of course, to change the flavor up just a little bit, and this is optional, dried cranberries. You can also add other things for crunch like toasted walnuts or some other nuts. It depends on what your family likes. Don't be afraid to experiment. All right, you're going to want to heat up your pan and dump in the oil. Let that warm up. If you're using an induction burner, be very careful. Do not grab the pan by the handles. You will burn yourself. So as the oil heats up, we're going to get ready to dump in the onions. And again, be careful because they will splatter. And so it's about a 1/4 cup of onions and about a 1/4 cup of celery. If you don't like celery, you can leave it out. Some people find it tastes like soap. It's a personal thing. And you're going to want this to saute for a few minutes and add in a little bit of salt. If you don't have olive oil, you can use a good vegetable oil or neutral tasting like canola. I wouldn't recommend an extra virgin olive oil. It's going to have a little bit strong taste and you want something mild. And we're not trying to brown the onions or the celery. We just want them to get a little bit translucent. You can have them sizzling merrily away in there. The idea is to sweat them a little bit so that they're softened, but we want to keep it with a little bit of texture. That's one of the main complaints when I was asking people for stuffing is it's too mushy. Soft is great, but texture is where it's at. We're going to add about 1/2 cup of mushrooms. They will reduce and release some liquid. And again, you just want to move them around a little bit just so that they break down and they get contact with the pan to start caramelizing and releasing water. Let that go for another minute. If you could only smell my kitchen, it smells wonderful. I'm going to turn it up just a smidge. I would say put it on a medium heat at this point. You're going to want to break everything down a little bit fast. If you cook it too slow, it's going to release water and cook, but the texture is not going to be the same. All right, so at this point we're going to add in the butternut squash, all of it. And if you don't like butternut squash, you can always use sweet potato or yam. Just keep in mind the size when you purchase them. You want them again a smaller size, not the big 3-pound version. And once this breaks down a little bit, we're going to add the zucchini. Zucchini cooks really fast. And again, it's more of a texture thing versus overcooking something. Because you're going to add the liquid and the quinoa, and that's going to soften it even further. And we'll add another pinch of salt. I'm just adding a little bit at a time at this point, so maybe, yeah, a good sized pinch. That will help the squash release some of the water. And you're going to want it to brown just a little bit if possible before we add in the water and the quinoa. It goes really quickly. Again, this is one of those dishes you can do the day before. This part should take about maybe 5 to 10 minutes total. We're going to add in the zucchini. And again, the point is to kind of sear it a little bit, not steam it. So I would recommend using a fairly large pan to cook it in, not a small fry pan, because you are going to be mixing everything together near the end. The main thing when you're cooking vegetables is you want to take into consideration the size versus the density. So zucchini are very porous and they're full of water. They're very mild, which is why I like using them as a primary vegetable when I cook. Butternut squash is very dense, so it's going to take a little bit longer to cook, and zucchini generally cooks fairly rapidly. So at this point I'm going to add in the poultry seasoning, and that's about a teaspoon worth. And you can really smell the sage in that quite a bit. And at this point you're going to want to keep stirring, because otherwise what's going to happen is it's going to scorch on the bottom. If you need to add a little bit of water or stock, you can do so now. We're going to be adding in the quinoa and stock in just a moment. Okay, I've added the stock. I use vegetable stock for this one, and the quinoa, and we're turning the heat up because we want it to come to a boil. And this actually will go fairly rapidly. At this point the vegetables are most of the way cooked. We're just going to bring the temperature up so that way the quinoa can steam and finish cooking the vegetables the rest of the way. Another way to do this is if you have a rice cooker that has a quinoa setting, is you can cook the quinoa in the rice cooker ahead of time, saute the vegetables on the stove, and then combine the two when everything is done, and then just let it sit for about 5 to 10 minutes so all the flavors meld. It's very simple. Again, this is one you can do the day before or do the morning of. You can have it as a warm dish or a cold. I prefer it as a warm side dish, and if you do it the day before, when you pull the turkey out of the oven and you put the rolls and everything else in to warm in about a 350, you can put this in as well. That way it warms up. But it is a really tasty dish. The kitchen smells wonderful right now, but this is cooking and bubbling, and we'll let it go for about another 2 minutes. I think I'm going to add in some of the red peppers, and that's an optional. Some people can't have them. I like to think of diced peppers as flavor glitter, so they turn sweet when they cook, and just add a nice little bit of flavor that rounds everything out and it helps bring everything together. And I think we're also going to add some of these Italian peppers that I've cut up. And these are from a Fresno State plant that you can get at the Gibson Market when they're in season. They grow really easily, and they're not overpowering like some bell peppers can be. So this is bubbling merrily along. Give it about another minute. What I will do is I'll cover it, turn off the heat, and set it off to the side for about 10 to 15 minutes so everything finishes steaming. We'll fluff it up, add in the dried cranberries, and it'll be all set to eat. So give me just a moment and we'll go from there. So we've done the quinoa stuffing, and now we're going to go to a more traditional take on bread. So one of the complaints that I've heard regarding stuffing is it gets too soggy, and we're going to try and offset that with some croutons that we have crushed. They're going to provide texture. They will soften up a little bit once we mix in the stock and get everything going, but they won't break down and become as soft as the French bread. So stuffing is a great way to use up leftover bread. This is about half of a loaf of French bread or baguette that has been torn and left to air dry for a couple of days. You can cube it into squares if you like, but I like the torn effect. Again, it's a little bit more interesting on the texture. So before we get started, I have a pan with about 3 tablespoons of melted butter. Again, I use unsalted whenever possible. You can always add salt in down the road, but you can't take it out once it's added. We have the half a cup of croutons, about a half a cup of diced mushrooms, a little over a quarter cup of celery, the flavor glitter of diced peppers, that's about 3 tablespoons, a half a cup of diced onion, and again use whichever type you like the best, about a tablespoon of poultry seasoning. I don't think we use all of it. We're going to season and taste as we go, but I have about a tablespoon to get started. And then the rest of the Italian peppers from earlier, that's about probably 2 to 3 heaping tablespoons. Again, the peppers provide different types of flavor based on the color. The red and orange are a little bit sweeter, and the Italian peppers are kind of a green bell pepper, but not as bitter a flavor. And then we have some stock, a little bit of Worcestershire, and salt and pepper. It's really simple, so we're going to get this turned on and get the vegetables sauteing. Okay, heat the oil up a little bit. And that should heat up fairly rapidly. You don't want to put the vegetables in before the oil heats up. They're just going to sit there and become a little bit waterlogged as opposed to browning or frying quicker. So the oil is popping a little bit. We're going to add in, start with the celery. It's a little bit denser and takes a little bit longer to break down. We'll add the onions in too, just so they start wilting and caramelizing a little bit. That will add a little bit additional flavor to the stuffing. And you can use a milder onion or even a leek or shallot, depending what you like and what's available in your area. Living in the Central Valley, we're a little bit spoiled in that we have everything close. All right, so pan is frying. As you can see, the onions slowly are becoming a little translucent and see-through as opposed to being opaque and milky white. And again, we don't want them to cook completely down because we do want the texture, so to offset the soggy bread that a lot of people complain. So we're going to add the Italian peppers in. Again, because they're a little bit more like a green pepper, the flavor is going to take a little bit longer to mellow. And they also provide nice color in there as well. The seeds are edible, but I do try to clean most of them out. So once it's all finished, you won't be able to tell if there are any seeds. All right, so from there, we're going to add the mushrooms. The mushrooms will have a little bit of water, and that needs to evaporate out. Since they're diced up small, they should cook fairly rapidly. And I added a pinch of salt about a few minutes ago. Again, just a little bit to get the water breaking out of the vegetables. Not enough to completely season it. We're going to be doing that in just a moment. So I'm going to add these breadcrumbs in. These are the croutons that I've crushed up, and you can use whatever type you like. If you don't have croutons, you can take stale bread or a couple pieces of bread, chop them up, toss them lightly with some olive oil, and put them in the oven at about 250 until they're dried out. It should take about probably 15-20 minutes, but check them halfway through just to make sure they don't burn. All right, so from there we're going to add the rest of the peppers. And I like peppers. They turn sweet when you cook them, and they just provide a nice cheerful color. All right, so we're going to put just a little bit of stock in. And again, this is one of those you can use whatever type of stock you like. I prefer chicken or turkey stock, but vegetable stock will work just as well. If you are vegetarian or vegan, you can use vegetable stock, and it will do the job quite nicely. So we're going to cook this up just a little bit more because we want the broth to heat up just a smidge. And taste that. Okay, needs a little bit of black pepper. I'm going to put in the Worcestershire. Worcestershire gives a nice flavor contrast and mellows everything out, brings the flavors together. Another pinch more salt. And now we're going to put in about a third of the poultry seasoning, or about a teaspoon. And it is pretty fragrant, so you don't want to go overboard. Okay, and take taste again. All right. So I don't want to add the rest of the broth yet, because this is going to go in the oven to crisp up the top. So what I'm going to do now is, we have this big bowl of the dried French bread that's kind of crispy. I'm going to take this and dump everything in. For the last of the broth, that was about 1 cup of broth, and give it a good stir. At this point, you can take a look. If the bread looks a little dry or too dry, then you can add a little bit more of the broth or water. We're going to be putting some butter on top when we put it in the oven, so it gets nice and golden. And again, that will offset any of the mushy tendencies or soft tendencies that people have mentioned. You can also add walnuts if you want to add a little bit more crunch after it bakes. It's a good time to put it in now. So let me get a pan. I'll add it to the pan and we'll get it ready to go in the oven. So this pan is ready to go in the oven. If you think it's going to be too dry, you can add just a splash of water or broth. I wouldn't add too much. And this is one of the dishes that you can do a day or two ahead of time. Pull it out about 20 minutes on the day of. Let it come to room temperature for that time, and then put it in the oven for about 350 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes. You can check on it and it will crisp up nice on top, but stays soft and fluffy in the middle. We haven't overcooked the vegetables, so they're going to have a little bit of crunch to them, or a little bit of toothfulness. And with the addition of the croutons, it's going to give it a little bit of crunch as well. So you won't have to have people complain about soggy dressing. For this session, we're going to be making a variation of the green bean casserole called spicy green beans. This dish can be either served as a salad cold, or you can serve it warm with the rest of the meal. The choice is up to you. It's very simple, it goes pretty quickly, and if you like spice, this is for you. So we're going to take 3/4 of a pound of green beans. That's about 1.5 cups, 2 cups approximately. We're going to take 2 tablespoons of olive oil, the zest and juice of 1 lime, 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, a little bit of julienne basil to go in at the end, salt and pepper. Very simple. Oh, and you can't forget the other star ingredient, 3 tablespoons of creamy horseradish sauce. I know, horseradish? Yeah. I was not a fan myself until I tried this dish, and it goes wonderfully with either poultry or even with like a side of beef, roast beef. I'm pretty sure it would go well with chicken as well. So give it a shot. You can always make it a little spicier if you want, or tone it down with a little bit less creamy horseradish sauce. So we're going to be using an induction burner today, and let me get that turned on. One good thing about induction is you can control the temperature a little bit easier, a little bit more precise than using a regular stove. So give me just a moment to get this going. We're going to be bringing about 3 quarts of water to a boil. Put in about 2 tablespoons of salt. You want it pretty salty to season the green beans while they're cooking. Once we blanch them for a few minutes, we're going to shock them in cold water. That will help set the green chill them down rapidly, and while they're chilling, we'll make the vinaigrette to put it all together. Should only take a few moments once everything gets going, so give me just a moment to get the water boiling and we'll go from there. So apparently waiting for a pot of water to boil takes longer than you want. So we've got it almost boiling. I'm going to take the 3/4 pound of green beans and add them to the salty water. And we're going to let them cook for about 3 to 5 minutes. We're going to want it to come to a boil, and that way we start cooking them a little bit. But while we're waiting for that to happen, we're going to make the vinaigrette. So in a bowl, we're going to put the 3 tablespoons of horseradish, and that's spicy. Okay, we're going to put the olive oil, lime juice, olive oil, and the apple cider vinegar. Okay. Add in the zest of 1 lime. And if you don't have a zester, you don't need to buy one, just get a cheese grater and use the small side of that in order to get the green part of the lime off. You don't want to go down to the white part, the pith. That is very bitter and you will not enjoy it at all. Alright, so we have our gigantic whisk and we're just going to mix it up really good. You want to make sure that the oil and the horseradish incorporate. It turns a lovely shade of green. We have a little bit of salt, and this is where you season to taste. I'm going to put a couple of pinches in because there is salt in with the green beans, so you don't want to make it too salty until you taste it. Put in a few twists of black pepper, and you're going to whisk it again. And that's all there is to making the vinaigrette. It doesn't take a lot because you want it to coat the green beans, not saturate them. Okay, so we're done with that. We're just going to let that sit. Stay. And when in doubt, taste it. It's very creamy, a little spicy, but not so much that it's going to make your taste buds start watering. But it's got a little tang from the apple cider vinegar, and it should pair very nicely with the green beans. The green beans turn a little bit sweet when you cook them, whether it's roasting or boiling, so it's a nice counterbalance. Let's give this another minute while we're waiting for the water to finish boiling and the green beans to cook. And then I'll show you how to drain them, and we'll incorporate everything all together. Alright, so it took forever, but they came to a boil, and I've cooked them at boiling for about 5 to 7 minutes. So what you're going to want to do at this point is drain them and put them into an ice bath. So this bowl has ice water in it. You want to shock them to keep the green color and also halt the cooking process. If you don't have room for an ice bath or enough ice cubes to do an ice bath, you can use really cold water. It just will take a little bit longer. You might have to change the water about halfway through to cool it down all the way. If you're going to use this as a warm side dish, you don't need to cool it down as much. But I would recommend cooling it down just a little bit at least. But we're going to prepare this like it is a cold side dish. Alright. So those are cooling down nicely. You want to stir them a little bit. Alright, so once they've cooled off, you're going to want to make sure you get all the water out of the colander and add them to the vinaigrette. From there, you're just going to stir it up and coat the green beans. The purpose for draining the green beans is to get as much water as possible. That way the vinaigrette can coat the green beans. And at this point, you can eat the dish or put it in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes. At that point in time, you would stir it up again just to make sure that all the green beans are covered. Everything's coated nicely. There are some additions you can put in. You could put in some diced bell pepper. I like to think of it as a little bit of flavor flakes. And this is diced cocktail onion. It has a pickled vinegary flavor that pairs nicely with the horseradish. And then of course you can't forget the julienne basil. So mix that all together. And if you're going to have it as a cold salad, then chill it again, make sure everything is all mixed up together. And if you want to have it as a warm side dish, you could pop it in the oven about 20 minutes on low heat, about 300, just to warm it up. And you could even put some breadcrumbs on top to make even a more semblance to the green bean casserole, but just warn people that it has a little bit of a kick. All right, and I hope you try this one. Let me know what you think. But it's a nice, easy dish. Don't forget, life is too short for bad food. Hi, my name's Michelle Falk from Have Fork Will Travel, and I'm here for the Thanksgiving edition of the Fresno County Library's Healthy Eating. So today I'm going to show you how to make two simple desserts. One is going to be a rustic pie called a galette with apples and persimmons, and the other dessert is a no-bake pumpkin cheesecake. The only thing you have to bake on the cheesecake are the crust, and that's pretty simple. So when you're doing a graham cracker crust or a cookie crust, you're going to want to take the cookies, hard cookies like ginger snaps or vanilla wafers or graham crackers, crush them down. You can put them in a food processor, or if you don't have one available, you can put them in a plastic bag and go over it with a rolling pin until you have everything crushed down. You want an even size, that way when you're filling the pie tin, it's easy to press them down and get everything seated without parts of it sticking up. You want an even surface as much as possible. So we're going to start off with 1.5 cups of graham cracker crumbs that have been crushed. We have a 1/4 cup of sugar and 1/8 teaspoon of salt. And then we have 1 stick or 1/2 cup of melted unsalted butter. You want to use unsalted whenever possible in baking, because otherwise you're going to wind up with a too high salt level. And you can always add more salt to a dish, but you can't take it out once it's there. So to start with, I'm going to mix in the sugar and the salt. And you can do this with a spoon. I prefer the hands-on method myself. So I prefer rubber gloves just so that I don't have a mess to clean up afterwards. You mix in the sugar and the salt so it's incorporated. Again, you're wanting an evenness, so that way when you mix it all together, the sugar, when you heat it or cook it, is going to caramelize and help set your pie crust a little bit faster. So you're going to want to drizzle some of the melted butter in and mix it up. And drizzle a little bit more in and mix it up. And the idea is you want all of the butter mixed in with the crumbs and the sugar for an even consistency on that, because you're going to be pressing that into the pie crust. And as you can see, it just takes a few minutes. If you're using a food processor to do this, make sure to pulse it periodically. You don't want to turn it on high and let it go. You'll have a goopy mess. So once that's mixed up, that should be pretty good. A little bit more. Make sure the butter is a little bit warm, not hot when you start putting it in. If it's cold, it will start setting too quickly and you'll have a hard time or harder time pressing it in the pans. So it takes about half of a cup per pie tin, give or take. And the easiest way is just scoop some in because you want it evened out so that way you have enough for all of the pie tins. Now if you're using a regular 9-inch pie plate, which is standard, just dump the whole thing in and press it around. I'm making smaller size ones because I like sharing with my friends. That way everybody gets to try some. So there's enough for one more. We'll put that in there real quick. Yep. And don't be afraid to get a little messy. Again, if you have small children around, this is a good thing for them to do. Just make sure that their hands are clean, they've washed ahead of time, but you're going to press it in as much as possible. You want it as tight to the pie tin as you can, so that way when you bake it, you get a nice crunchy crust. I personally like my graham cracker crust a little bit thicker because I like cookies. But you at least need a thin layer, and make sure you press the bottom really tight too. Again, this is a no-bake cheesecake, so it isn't as detrimental if you don't get the bottom sealed because it's a little bit thicker mixture that's going to go in. But you do want to make sure that you have a nice layer. Again, this is going to bake and set, so that way you can pull it out of the pan for plating if you want. If you don't want to serve it in the pie tin for the small sizes, you definitely going to want to be able to pull it out of a larger pie tin to serve it if you use the regular 9-inch. So let me get these finished up real quick. As you can see, it's pretty easy. You just press it in. You can also use the side of a measuring cup to press it, or a good stiff spoon. I'm kind of a hands-on person, so that way I can gauge what's going on with it. And you might have some crumbs left over by the time you get through the pie tins, but that's okay. Since it's just butter and sugar and cookie crumbs, you can save that to sprinkle on top when you're done. Put it on ice cream, any other sort of dessert topping. There shouldn't be too much left, especially if you're using the 9-inch pie plate, because you'll just dump the whole thing in there. With small ones, it's a little bit tighter, but it's still okay. All right, one to go. As you can see, it just takes a minute. And you can do this a day or two ahead of time. If you're not sure, you can always bake them the day before, say for Thanksgiving, the Tuesday or Wednesday before, and do the filling the next day. Just make sure that you cool them completely before you cover them up, and try to keep moisture from getting into where they're at. Like seal them in a plastic bag or with plastic wrap, because even though they're baked, they might get a little soft just from the moisture in the air. All right, so there you have it. We have 5 pie tins all set to go. Let me turn the oven on, put them in, and start them baking. They take about 12 to 15 minutes at 350 degrees. You want to watch till they're golden and pull them out at that point. Let them cool completely on a rack or on a towel on the counter. You don't want to put the filling in while they're still warm because it will cause the filling to kind of melt. So give me just a minute, we'll put them in the oven and we'll go from there. All right, now while we're waiting for the cookie crust or graham cracker crust to bake, we're going to start on the apple rustic pie. So to do that, we need to start with the crust for that. Pie crusts are actually pretty simple, but they can be a little tricky. We're going to go with the easy route. We have 2 cups of all-purpose flour, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, And we're going to go with about 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. Now there are 2 schools of thought for pie crust. One is a butter crust, one is a vegetable shortening crust. So today, again, we're trying to keep it simple, no stress. We're going to go with a butter flavored vegetable shortening. One of the good things about this type of crust is that you can make it without, it's a little bit less expensive for one, and I think it makes a better crust than if you tried substituting margarine for butter. Butter is still the best way to go, but it can be a little pricey, and the vegetable shortening is fairly easy. So after you put everything together, you're going to use a pastry blender, or gloves, hands, or if you want to take a really long time, you can use a wooden spoon. I again prefer using my hands for this because it goes a little bit faster. You can also do it in a food processor as well. You're going to pulse everything together until it resembles cornmeal, kind of a coarse texture. It doesn't take too long, and again, I really enjoy having a hands-on approach. So it incorporates pretty quickly. You do want the shortening or butter as cold as possible. The purpose for that is when you mix it together, you're going to wind up with flakier layers as the water in the shortening, and we're going to be adding a little bit of water in just a moment, expand. If you overwork it, that's where you get the dense pie crust. If you're not sure if you're going to be able to pull off a pie crust from scratch, you can always go with the store-bought version. If you use the one that's already formed and in the pie tin, I would recommend letting it thaw in the refrigerator. Once the pie crust is soft, you can take the edge and fold it in, as you'll see when we get to that part, and make it look a little bit more homemade. If you use the pre-made pastry or pie crust, just let it thaw completely per the directions, roll it out, and you're good to go. And as you can see, we are at kind of a rough crumble stage. So from that point, you're going to take ice water, and you're going to just take a tablespoon at a time, sprinkle it over, and work it in. And it's fairly easy. It goes quick. The only thing with doing pie dough is you need to plan ahead a little bit because it will need to rest for about an hour or 2 in the refrigerator. You don't want to add a lot of water because then you wind up with a goopy, soggy crust, and we don't want that. But you want to add just enough to be able to hold everything together. We're going to add 2 just to speed it up a little bit. You shouldn't need to add more than probably 6 to 8 tablespoons. You just want everything to be able to pull together in a nice lump. This isn't quite damp enough yet. It's still a little on the dry side, so we'll add 2 more, and that should about do it. But you do want to try and sprinkle it and spread it around a little bit so you're not working the crumbs as too much. A tough crust will hold up to the filling, but it won't be as flaky and nice when you're eating it. All right, so we almost have enough. Let's see. Nope, a little bit more. And part of baking for this sort of thing is depending on the air temperature, the moisture in the air, because sometimes when you're baking, it's going to go a little bit less water, sometimes a little bit more. It also depends on the type of flour. If you're going with more of a whole wheat crust, it's going to take a little bit more water. If you're substituting for, say, almond meal or any of the other ground nut flours or coconut flour, you're going to want to take that into consideration as well. Maybe do a small test batch to see how it stays together when you bake it. And you might need to add a little bit more sugar, again, depending on what all you're doing. If you're going to substitute any of the nut flours or coconut flour, I would recommend starting with a small amount and then slowly over subsequent pies or batches change the ratio a little bit because you do need the gluten to try and hold everything together for this since you're not using any egg. All right, so that's about good. What we're going to do is we're going to put it in a plastic bag and put it in the refrigerator for 1 to 2 hours so that way the flour can rehydrate, and when you roll it out everything will stick together and hold its shape. Now see, that didn't take hardly any time at all. And that was the oven coming to temperature. As you can see, you can do some of this all at the same time. You don't have to just do one day and one the other. But if you wanted to plan ahead and get the pies done the day before Thanksgiving, then please feel free to do so. You'll just want to keep them, the end product, in the refrigerator for the apple pie. Or the pie shells, you'll want to keep those in a sealed bag or container to keep them nice and crisp. So this is all set. We're going to put it in the fridge for 1 to 2 hours and go from there. So now that the pie dough has chilled for 1 to 2 hours in the fridge, you can even let it go overnight if you don't have the time. You're going to want to pull it out. And the flour should have rehydrated between the shortening and the water that you sprinkled in. You want to pull it out, and it's a big lump. So it's a little stiff from being in the fridge. That's okay. What you're going to want to do is press it out a little bit. I like doing this. Some people use a rolling pin, but again, I'm hands-on. So if it's a little dry like this is, I'll just take, again, just a very little, I mean just barely any at all, and work it in. The idea is you want it to stick together or stay together, like that's crumbling, which means that the dough was not quite hydrated enough when we put it in the fridge. So that's an easy fix. You don't want to handle it too much because again, if you do, it will make it tough. But at this point, you're just going for a rough shape. Doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to tell anyone that you fought with it. Nobody will care because it will taste delicious. So one of these things I have is a bench scraper. It can be plastic or metal. You can pick them up at the dollar store or any of the big box stores. But that will become like a extra pair of hands for you to help keep things from sticking. As you can see, I have a silicone mat under my work area here. It's easier to clean, keep flour off of the furniture. And you're going to want to work this out till it's, you can either go for a rectangle or a round shape. We're going to go for a round shape because to me that says pie a little bit more than a rectangle. Rectangle to me for doing pies means you're serving a lot of people. And I don't think this Thanksgiving is going to be one where most people have a lot of family or friends over if they're being safe. All right, so this is breaking apart a little bit. And again, that's okay. We're going to use very little water, so just a couple drops in each of the areas where it's breaking apart, because we just want enough moisture for it to kind of stick together just a smidge. And we're going to even that out with flour when we put the apples on. You do want a good seal for this crust because when the apples and persimmons cook, they're going to release some moisture. And if you have any holes in the bottom, it will leak out and make a mess. If you use a stone baking sheet like this, you might want to put tin foil underneath it, especially if you're not sure of how to work pie crust, just to make sure, because it will, hot sugar is like molten lava and it is a booger to clean up once it sets. All right, so we have this here and we have most of a shape, round as a shape. And again, a rustic pie doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to taste good. So everything is about 1/4 of an inch. Again, make sure there are no holes. And the edge can be rough and a little bit jagged. That's okay. That's part of the appeal of this type of pie. And make sure any little bits of dough are firmly attached to the sides. All right, so we're pretty well done there. I think that will work just fine. One more roll. And if you don't have a rolling pin, you can also use a bottle, a really sturdy glass, but make sure that it is very sturdy. You don't want any incidents on your hands. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit of flour and just smooth that over, just to make it easier. All right, let me move this. So we have 2 Granny Smith apples and 1 Gala apple that I've cut up and 2 persimmons that I've peeled and sliced. If you have a mandolin, you can use that on the thickest setting. You want the pieces to be as uniform as possible. That way everything cooks evenly. Before I add them though, we're going to dump in a 1/4 cup of white sugar, about 3/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon. You can use more or less, it depends on your personal taste. And because the fruit will release liquid during cooking, we're going to add in a little bit of cornstarch. We're going to add in 1 teaspoon of cornstarch that will help gel and absorb some of the flavors. And we're going to use a spoon. Stir everything up here just to get everything nice and coated. Again, you can use your hands. It's up to you. Whatever makes you the most comfortable and gets everything where it needs to be. Some of the options, you can use pumpkin pie spice if you want more of the seasonal flavor of things. If you prefer ginger, you can use that instead of cinnamon as well. There are some other spice mixes that will work just as well. If you add in coriander or some cardamom, you bring more of an Indian flair to the dish. But traditional is more just apples, cinnamon, and sugar. So we're going to go with that. All right, so that's nice and mixed up. And now's the fun part. So you're going to take it and you're going to want to leave 1 inch around at least, so that way you have some way to roll up the sides of the crust. And you can lay these in here however you want, whatever works for you. Looks like this one has a little bit of a smaller edge, so I'm going to go inside a little bit. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to taste good. And I'm a big fan of getting youngsters to help. So if you have small children, this is a good way to help teach them shapes or counting and have them count the slices as they put it in. But it's a lot of fun. I highly recommend trying to get your kids learning to cook and bake. It's a survival skill. It's fun. It's a good bonding experience. And personally, that was one of the best memories I have growing up of my dad teaching me how to cook. So you can make it as pretty as you want, or you can chop everything up and just mix it all together. It's up to you. So we have 1 row of apples. And these are the type of persimmon that are about similar texture. You can pick them up and eat them like an apple. They're not the mushy ones that go into persimmon cookies, which I like also, but I don't think that they would work as well for this sort of dish. All right, so we have another round of that. We'll put 1 in the middle. And you're going to want to make sure that you keep the outer edge a little bit lower than the center. That way when you fold up the edges of the galette, you don't have a mess on your hands with apples trying to escape or the crust breaking, because that can happen. All right, so put a little bit more on. If you wind up with too much apple, I don't know how that's the case, but you might. You can just throw it into a little dish in the oven while you're baking the galette, and then pull it out and have a snack while you're waiting for the pie to cool. For me, that's always the hardest part, the waiting. All right, so just a couple more slices. We'll probably put some of the persimmons around the edge as well. See how nice that looks? If you could only tell what my house smells like with all the baked goods going on right now. All right, so we're going to put some more persimmons around. One more time. It's all the flavors of fall. And you can tell everybody you did this. All right, a couple more pieces. It is messy, but that's okay. It's just you in your kitchen, having fun, nobody judging. All right, so let me pause for just a second and rinse my hands off because they're all sticky, and I'll be right back. We'll fold up the edges of this. All right, now that I have all the sticky off my hands, you're going to take your bench scraper and start folding gently. And it'll be a little bit tough in spots because the dough is very cold, but just go slow and fold it towards the middle. If it crumbles a little bit, just press it back together. The main thing is make sure that you don't have any leaks or broken edges on the side. And if it does, you can just get your finger a little bit wet with the extra water that you should have handy and press it together. Again, it doesn't have to be pretty. That's part of the joys of a rustic pie. And that shows that it's homemade. All right, so just a couple more little edges. And if you have, like this has a little bit more, you can always just trim it off and fit it where it needs to if you have a place that is a little bit thinner or sprung a leak. Now's the time to catch it because otherwise you're going to have a mess in the oven. All right. As you can see, this is a little bit of a pain. So I'm just going to get my fingers damp and press it together. And just make sure everything is sealed. And again, I would recommend putting it on a piece of tin foil just to make sure that you don't have any of the juices escape into the oven and cause a flare-up. All right, I think we're about ready. Oh, one more spot. Now we're cooking. So, all right. So all the edges are sealed. We don't have any little surprise holes. And we'll put this last little bit here. Okay, I have a baking dish that I've put a piece of parchment paper on. And that way it doesn't stick. Just using my bench scraper to loosen up the pie crust. If you're just starting, you might want to put this together on the baking sheet and make it a lot easier. I live dangerously, so we're doing it this way. All right, I had to bring out the big boy to get it over all in one piece. So definitely make this on your baking tray or stone next time. Don't try and move it after. Bad things can happen. So now that's there, again, double checking one last time to make sure we don't have any leaks or any little holes that can cause problems in the oven. If you notice in the bowl, because there was a little bit of moisture from the apples and the persimmons, because they were in a lemon water, I'm just going to take that because it has some cinnamon and just kind of brush it around. It will help brown and glaze the crust a little bit more. There's a little bit of sugar in there, but a little bit extra won't hurt at this point. And a little bit more. You don't want to get it too damp because otherwise, again, it could get soggy in baking and could cause a mess. And then I'm going to take a little bit of brown sugar, that about, maybe not more than a tablespoon or so. Probably won't even use that, probably only about a teaspoon. And you're just going to sprinkle it over. And the idea for that is it's going to caramelize on top, give it a little bit of extra browning, make it a little bit sweeter and caramely in flavor, caramely taste. And that's about the best way to have an apple pie in my book. So this is all set. I'm going to get a paper towel and dry up this little dribbles around the edge because we don't want it to burn in the oven. It can do that very easily. So let me get that cleaned up. It's going to go into a 375 oven for about an hour. I would recommend setting your timer for about 45 minutes and then check it about every 5 minutes after that, just to make sure that the crust doesn't get too dark or burn. So give me a moment and we'll swap it out. So that was a long hour, and the harder part after you pull it out of the oven is waiting for it to cool enough so you can eat it. So this is what it looks like when you pull it out. See how pretty that is? All you're going to do is slice it. It is the easiest apple pie you've ever made. If you don't like persimmons, you can substitute pears, and that will work just as well. But it's nice, it's simple, it's flaky, and it's really good. That might be my breakfast tomorrow with a cup of coffee. So that's it for the galette or rustic pie. Give me a moment and we'll show you how to do the filling for the no-bake pumpkin cheesecake. So now that the galette is done and our pie shells have baked and cooled, we can start on the filling. And again, I recommend that you let the pie shells cool completely because otherwise the filling will melt. So what we have is 1 8-ounce brick of cream cheese. Let it come to room temperature and soften. We have a 1/2 cup of white sugar, 1 teaspoon vanilla, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and then we have 1 tablespoon of pumpkin pie spice. Now, if you are a pumpkin pie spice fanatic, you can always add more. I recommend starting with the 1 tablespoon. You can always add a little bit more once you've mixed everything together and see if it's where you like it. If you aren't a fan so much of pumpkin pie spice, then you can always use a little bit less, but I wouldn't recommend using less than probably 1/2 tablespoon or 2 teaspoons, because otherwise you're going to lose the whole fall vibe of the pumpkin cheesecake. So you're going to want to whip the softened cream cheese just to make sure there are no lumps. And then we're going to start adding in 1.5 cups of pumpkin puree, not pumpkin pie mix, pumpkin puree. If you aren't able to find pumpkin puree, you can always substitute cooked mashed sweet potatoes or yams. It'll be a similar flavor. It won't be quite the same, but it'll be close enough. And if you drizzle a little bit of maple syrup on top right before you serve it, nobody will know or care. So let me whip this real quick and then we'll add in the rest of the ingredients and mix it accordingly. Since it's softened, it whips fairly easily. So from here, you're going to want to add in the rest of the ingredients. So we have the vanilla, the salt, pumpkin pie spice. We'll add the sugar in because sugar is very important in a dessert. And the pumpkin puree. And again, with this, you might have a little bit left over, but because there are no eggs in the pumpkin seasoning or the pumpkin filling, I guess it is, you don't need to worry about having to pasteurize it. You can use any leftovers as like a dip for cookies or carrots, or put in between some ginger snaps and make a cookie sandwich. So let me mix this up and then we'll fold in the whipped cream. Okay, I recommend stopping it after a minute and wiping the sides down with a rubber or silicone spatula. You want to make sure that the ingredients are mixed completely and not have a chunk of pumpkin or cream cheese sitting on the edge. That'd be kind of a rude surprise to somebody if they're expecting a smooth pie and get a lump of cream cheese. All right, so let me go ahead and take this off. Now comes the fun part, the folding. So this is 3 cups of sweetened whipped heavy cream. If you're not able to make whipped cream, you can always use 1 tub of Cool Whip or similar product. Just let it thaw first. So we're going to add in the 3 cups of sweetened whipped cream. And again, this is one of the desserts or dishes you can do a day or so ahead of time, just so that you're not rushed or under stress on the holiday. So you're going to want to fold it in. You want to keep the air in the whipped cream, but make sure everything is incorporated, and you're just going to fold. You're not stirring. It's a different type of action and has a completely different result. But you want the whipped cream and the pumpkin to be a nice even color all through. Make sure to scrape the bottom. It's one of the things I learned early on, is make sure to scrape the bottom or you're going to wind up having a glop of something that you wish you'd mixed in. All right, so it's a little swirly, but not bad. So we can go from there. You'll take the pie shells. And I'll admit I did snack on a piece of crumble that fell off, and it's really good. I like cookies, so that's why. So it's going to take about 1/4 to 1/2 cup, depending on, for each one, depending on how high you want to scoop it, or how much you want to share with family and friends as far as your dessert. All right. I'm doing this part first so then I can smooth it and see if I need to add any more. And again, you will have leftovers. If you're using the small pans like this, you might want to make a little bit more of the crust. If you're using the 9-inch pie, it should work out just fine. A bit more for this one. All right. Give me just a moment and we'll get these smoothed. So big jobs call for big tools. And again, this is part of the fun part. You can make it as smooth as you want, or you can play around and make little swirly designs. It's all up to you. Now you have a choice. You can either make it flat with the edge of the tin, or you can do like I did here and make it a little bit higher. Again, it's how much do you want to share with your family and friends, and how much do you want to keep for yourself. But this is really simple. As you can see, it only took a few minutes. The longest part was waiting for the pie crust to cool. And then you smooth these out. You want to try and keep them even, partially so nobody's trying to take the full one, because nobody's going to want to share these, I can tell you that now. And it's okay if you don't have everything mixed together 100%. It'll just create a nice little ripple effect with the colors, kind of a tie-dye effect. This one, I don't know if you can see it very well, but there's a little bit of a pumpkin swirl there, and that'll be just fine. It'll set wonderfully. So we have this. It tastes really good. So after that, We have a little bit of the crust left. Let me grab that. And this is a little bit of the crust that we had left over from earlier. So you can just take it and sprinkle it on. Again, it's just sugar, graham crackers, a little bit of butter. So it's kind of it's a cookie crumble. And there you go. And you have a real simple dessert that anybody can enjoy or help with. And I recommend getting your kids involved because it's fun and they'll learn a lot just by, it's similar to playing in wet sand when you're putting the crusts together. It's really fun. Anyways, I hope you try this. Give me some feedback of what you think. And remember, life is too short for bad food. So we've been covering some of the other parts of the dinner in other videos. Today we're going to cover the protein. So not everybody wants to tackle a full turkey, so we're going to cover a turkey leg, a Cornish game hen, and for a vegetarian option, we're going to have a stuffed portobello cap. So because it takes the longest, we're going to start with the turkey. The turkey and the game hen have been pre-brined just to speed up the process a little bit. For the brine, you're going to want to take 3 pints of water, 1 cup of salt, 1 bay leaf, 1 teaspoon of dried thyme. If you have fresh thyme, you can use that as well. Just keep in mind it's going to be a little bit stronger. 1 tablespoon of chopped garlic, which is about 3 cloves. 2 tablespoons of mustard. 1 to 2 teaspoons of red pepper flakes. That's optional. You don't have to use the red pepper flakes, but it does give a nice little kick at the end. And a 1/2 cup of sugar. You're going to mix that all together on the stove, heat it up a little bit so that way the salt and the sugar dissolve. Let it cool completely. You don't want to put poultry or any meat into a warm brine. It can encourage bacterial growth and then you're out the meat for the dinner. So once that's cooled, you put everything into a big pot or bowl enough to submerge the meat. If you have large enough bags that will hold the turkey breast or turkey leg, then you can use a zip style bag. Just make sure you put it in another container just in case it leaks. So we have the turkey leg. It's perfect for 1 to 2 people. And then you can shred it down and make soup afterwards, and we're going to cover part of that as the turkey cooks a little bit. So to that, we're going to add about 1.5 cups of broth. You can use water, vegetable stock, whatever you have handy. It just gives a little bit extra moisture to keep the meat from drying out. Take a little bit of olive oil and brush it on. And that will help keep the skin moist. We're going to crisp it up a little bit later, but a little bit of extra moisture to lock it in now won't hurt. Okay, once we're done with that, you're going to take a little bit of poultry seasoning or dried sage. It's up to you. We're just going to sprinkle it on. We're not going to add extra salt at this step because it is pre-brined. So it's going to be salty. You don't want to add too much salt at this stage. And that's all there is to it. You heat up the oven to 350. You're going to be putting it in the oven for 45 minutes covered. At the end of the 45 minutes, we'll pull it out. We'll add the Cornish game hen and chopped up vegetables to roast with that. Continue on, and then a little bit after that, we'll start basting it. But at this point, it's ready to go in the oven. It's really easy to do. Well, it's been 45 minutes, so it's time to pull the turkey leg out of the oven so we can take a look at it. Get ready to put the game hen in and everything back in the oven. So after 45 minutes, as you can see, the water's reduced actually a little bit, even though it's been covered. And the turkey leg is cooking and starting to turn golden a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the game hen in and then surround it by vegetables. Again, I like using a rubber glove or a plastic glove because it's easier than having to try to wash when you have a real small kitchen and you're trying to hurry. I also don't like the mess. So we're going to settle that right next to the turkey. And we're going to take a little bit of the olive oil that was left from earlier, drizzle it over the bird. Same thing as earlier of taking a little bit of the poultry seasoning or sage and just dusting it over the top. We're not adding salt at this point because the bird is brined, and there will be a little bit of salt added once we put the vegetables in. So I like having kind of a roast turkey soup after the holiday. If you don't want to add as much liquid, then you can, it's more of a braised dish. So we're going to take a bowl of cut vegetables. I have 1 sweet potato, 2 russets, 3 stalks of celery, and 1/4 to half of an onion. Again, that's up to you. So I'm going to put all of this in here and then let it roast for about another half hour before we start basting it. So I'm just going to dump everything in, and I have it sitting in water just to help get some of the starch out of the potatoes. And you're just going to want to nestle it around the turkey. In about half an hour, we're going to take the top off so the water will start evaporating, and we're going to start glazing the turkey with a butter mixture so that way it gets nice and golden. So let me tip this up so you can see it. And that's all there is to it. Don't let turkey scare you. It's fairly easy to do. It's just time consuming, and it's the easiest meal you can make. It's a one-pot meal. So the turkey leg and the game hen are done roasting. The sides are done. We have the 2 types of stuffing. So now we're going to work on the vegetarian option. Now, it's up to you which choice of stuffing you want to use. You can use the traditional bread. We're going to use the quinoa stuffing just to give it a little bit more texture, a little bit more protein. And again, this is good for either the day of, if you have somebody that wants a vegetarian option or just a different type of side or main, or you can do it the day after, and you can even add some of the leftover turkey if there is any. It's really simple. So we're going to start with 2 portobello mushroom caps. We have, I got the smaller size because there's just 2 of us at home, so this is going to go in addition to everything else. And I've taken the stem and the gills out on this one, and I'll show you how to do that. So you can eat the gill and the stems. The stems can be a little bit woody, and I don't mind the gills, but some people don't care for them. It's kind of a texture thing, and also when you're cooking with the gills in, it can turn whatever is in contact with it kind of a muddy color. So if you're using rice as the stuffing or a lighter filling, then it could turn a little dark brown, which it doesn't affect the flavor, but it does look not as pretty. So we have both of these. We'll set them on a pan that I have some parchment paper. You can use foil if you don't have parchment paper. The goal for that is to make easier cleanup for yourself, because there will be some oil and some cheese, and it'll make cleanup a lot faster at the back end. So to go in that, we have a little over a cup of stuffing, and again, it's whatever will fit inside of the caps and a little bit extra. We have about 1/4 cup of shredded cheese, and use whatever you have handy or what you like. We have the white and just a little bit of the green part of a green onion that's been diced. And let's see, the rest is all going to go on top. We're also going to add, just for a little bit more flavor, a good sized pinch of salt. There is salt in the cheese and in the stuffing, so you don't want to overdo it. And a little bit extra pepper never hurts. Okay, so we're going to stir that up. Give it a good little go there. And it's really simple, just so that everything is mixed all together. When it melts and heats up, the cheese is going to get all melty and be really good with the roasted mushroom. Now I have about 3 tablespoons of olive oil, and we're going to take that and just brush the bottom side, or well actually it's the top side of the caps. The idea for the oil is to keep them from drying out while they're roasting. Mushrooms do have a lot of water in them that will come out, and again, that's another reason to line your pan, just to keep everything contained. And it's okay if there's some in there. As far as the gills, you're just going to cover that up with stuffing anyways. All right, so that's covered, and we're going to just lightly brush the rims of it. Again, just to give it a little bit of insurance so it doesn't dry out too much in the oven. This is going to go fairly quickly, so you can prep things ahead of time. Turn your oven on to 350 and let it warm up while you're doing this part. All right, so we're going to take that and fill up your caps. And this is a good way to add in extra vegetables if you want to add in a little bit of cheese, shredded olives or diced olives, capers, whatever you have handy. It's just a great, easy meal for midweek. Even better the day after Thanksgiving, so you have very little dishes to do. I don't know about you, but after Thanksgiving, I want less dishes. All right, so a little bit more. And if you want, you can stuff it and heap it a little bit higher. I'm not going to. Okay, so we're going to take a little bit of the oil that's left and just kind of drizzle it over both. And then I have about a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce. You can also use balsamic. It's optional. It just adds a little bit of extra flavor and umami. I don't know about you, but it's fun to say umami. So we have that. We have the tops of the green onion that we diced up, and we're just going to sprinkle that on top. And then last and least, we have about 2 tablespoons of Parmesan cheese that we're going to just sprinkle on top. It's not going to melt, but it will give a nice little crust once it browns and the mushrooms cook. So that took, what, maybe 4 or 5 minutes? Real simple. We're just going to take them, put them in a 350-degree oven for about 12 to 15 minutes until the mushroom is soft and the cheese is browned or at least hardened up on top to make a nice little crust on top. So let's put it in the oven and we'll come back in about 15 minutes. Alrighty, so 15 minutes goes by really quick, just in case you weren't paying attention. So 15 minutes later, we pull these out of the oven. As you can see, there's a little bit of moisture that's come off of the portobellos, and that's normal. Portobellos have a lot of water in them anyways, so by not covering it, some's going to evaporate. That way the mushrooms don't get soggy. They are cooked through. The stuffing inside, if you use cold stuffing, I would recommend letting it sit out for about 5 to 10 minutes at least to come closer to room temperature before you stuff the mushrooms. That way they're heating at the same temperature or same time frame. And you can use whatever cheese. If you like blue cheese, you can fill it with blue cheese. If you have cheddar, just use what's available. Don't be afraid to experiment. You be you. So they look nice and delicious. We're going to plate the final meal so you can see what it looks like all together. So we've pulled the turkey and the game hen out of the oven. The stuffing is ready, both types. We have our green bean salad or casserole, depending how you want to call it. We have the really, really tasty, super simple cranberry sauce. And then with the roasted vegetables, you can always use what's left over from everything and make a really nice soup afterwards. Just save the liquid from the braising pot. So you've had a couple hours off and on in the kitchen. You've fixed Cornish game hen, a turkey leg, pumpkin cheesecake, an apple pie, some really tasty and easy to do cranberry sauce. And what did I do with that turkey leg? With that and all the vegetables and the extra broth from the roasting, I made turkey soup. So if you're not sure what to do with all the leftovers, you can always make soup. If you like a thicker broth, you can always add in a little bit of the bread stuffing. It will cook down and thicken it. You can always use leftovers to make something else. We've paired it with a local winery, Yuri Baron, and I'm not one to think that you can only pair poultry with white. Pick a flavor that you like. Just make sure that they complement. This is a little bit jammy, so that will go really well with the cranberry sauce and the apple pie. So you can't go wrong. If you have any questions, you can always drop me a line at www.forktravel.com. Leave a comment, ask a question, and you can find the recipes there as well. And remember, life is too short for bad food.